So let's start off with the positives and basically the question that we have seen floating around a lot. Um, what have you actually seen change in workflow in analysis workflows this year, considering there has been a lot of talk about how AI will change everything, basically? Alex, do you want to start?
Yes, I do think that LLMs are quite a paradigm shift in terms of how we interact with qualitative data and how we analyze qualitative data. I mean, Max and I and our co-founder Mate, when we started Condens, or first worked on Condens back in 2018, 2019, the standard workflow was to go through every interview, every transcript that you had from start to finish, read through it, highlight dedicated evidence pieces of quotes and then start to make sense of it from there. And I think with LLMs we now have the possibility to approach that in a very different way, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the original way sort of goes away or is obsolete or anything, but this gives us a new possibility to interact with qualitative data, with text, in a more direct way. We can ask questions against it. We can sort of use AI to help us jump into certain aspects that are relevant for us. And in certain cases, going through everything from start to finish may not be necessary anymore. And I think this is quite a shift, probably the biggest shift that we've seen in those 6 years. And we have seen some things in terms of transcription coming and whiteboards being included and all of these changes. I would say probably this is the biggest shift, and I'm actually quite excited about it because it gives qualitative research and people who are working with qualitative data a super powerful tool, and it heightens the value of all the things that you can do with qual. Last thing I'll say about that is when we started, and over the last couple of years, we still heard a lot of people saying that, yeah, it's tough in their organizations to sort of establish qualitative research. It's perceived to be slow. It's not statistically relevant or reliable. And I think with AI, we have now a new sort of way to leverage qualitative data in a much better way. And yes, it's still not statistically relevant. Not relevant. What's the word? Statistically,
Mm,
I'm forgetting the word. Significant.
Significant.
significant, exactly.
But AI gives us this new power to work with qualitative data, and I think this is super powerful, and this is why I'm excited about it. It makes it faster to interact with it. It makes it it helps us to include a much broader set of data that potentially wasn't possible due to time constraints before, and because of that, I'm really excited.
Yeah. Yep. From my side, in terms of what changed this year, what I find really interesting, like from the standpoint of building the product, is I think when ChatGPT came and we had all these ideas, and I think the first ideas were always like people were saying, okay, in 1 or 2 years, everything will be automated, everything will be like you just have to write a prompt and it's gonna be there. And I think what we actually see, especially in the last 12 months, is that AI really goes into all the smaller things that we do. And I think that's where the value really lies until at some point, maybe we are at a point where it's like AGI. But you can really see now that like basically all of the things that we already had in Condens get better. Let's say transcription got better. We have things like anonymization that are also AI powered. Not everything is LLM, of course, but generally AI powered. And we see that on like so many levels, that it's like all the smaller things just get better and better and better. And then on top, of course, we have like totally new ideas on how to bring AI into the workflow. As I said at the beginning, it was it might be very boring, where people just said automate it away. And now I think because it's like still a new technology, new patterns emerge how to actually make use of it and how to bring it into the workflow in a more seamless manner and not in a just push a button and get your auto report or things like that. So that's something I'm really excited about, and that's also something that reminds me a little bit on kind of like the shift to mobile that we had when I actually was still in university, where it was like a totally new paradigm and new possibilities, but no one has figured it out yet. And I think we're at this stage now where more and more like really useful applications emerge. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it's like entering a new era of like technology in general, but also in terms of user research, how things change quickly. Speaking of that, you both mentioned quite a few things that you saw kind of are exciting and that you see happening more and more. Um, is there something that you would point out or highlight that you think works particularly well today and not just in a few years' time?
I can start. So my rule of thumb is everything that has to do with language works well. I mean, these are language models, so everything that has to do with the language itself works well. That means, of course, natural language search, so searching things that are somewhere in your text, providing a couple of pieces of evidence or quotes and finding similar ones in your data, providing, I don't know, 50 snippets on a whiteboard and asking AI to help with initial clustering based on certain themes. These kind of things I think work really well as long as it's based on the actual, on the data layer, so to say, so on the text, on the things that you can observe. In contrast, everything that goes beyond that tends not to work very well. So things where it requires more context, for example, about the organization, about the goals, where it requires deeper reasoning, more creative or different views on the data. These are all things that typically humans are really good at and bring in. And yeah, I think this is sort of the rule of thumb that I use to differentiate. Max, so what do you think about it as well?
Yeah, I think it also depends on it depends on a lot on how you frame the result. So coming from like the programmatic approach, we are used to having results that are really reliable and repeatable. And of course, with AI, we don't have that. And then it depends on how the result is framed in terms of, is it rather like, is it as a suggestion, or is it rather like a definitive answer and you just use that and don't even have like a chance of editing it, right? And of course there's a spectrum. What I find like really cool now is that LLMs give us the power to give solutions or to problems that are more like fuzzy, right? It's things like, for example, tag suggestions that became better, or summaries or things like that, where of course you can always go in and say, okay, this is not right. But when you actually think about it, it's like task where when you would ask 2 or 3 different people, you would get different answers as well. So being like correct is always a little bit of a question of how do we phrase it? And I think we have to make the step and still also kind of learn how to show that for these fuzzy answers when we are still used to the machine, like the computer giving us like true answers, when for fuzzy problems, per definition, there is not one true answer, right?
Maybe in contrast to that, have you seen any things that kind of seem like they should work well and seem promising, but in reality don't really hold up to that promise?
Yeah, I think this is the essence of like LLMs and everything. It's like convincingly incorrect is a term that I learned. So this is the thing. I mean, they're trained to make words that are like expected, sort of, and sound good on the surface. And I myself had like tons of experiences where I read something AI generated, and on first sight, and like they looked really cool and convincing, and then on the second thought, and we're like, wait, what does this actually mean? What does this word mean? And then you read it again, you're like, okay, this is complete bullshit. This doesn't make any sense. So I think this is the difficult thing, and then one of the challenges that we're facing is that it does sound so convincing on first sight, but then when you dig deeper, that it's difficult. Yeah, I mean, this relates to what Max said, like the one-click report generation feature where you can just, get a report, and yes, it will potentially look or sound relevant, and it may quote one or two of the participants that you talked about. But then in aggregate, and if you go into the details, then you start how it doesn't necessarily really make sense. So this is the difficulty we have to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Also, I think I'm not even sure if that's something that's ever going to be solved, like, or where we say, okay, we want to have that automated. I saw that Emil just wrote, if designers or researchers say what they don't want AI to do. And I think there are some things that it's inherently difficult for just to automate away, because part of it is that as humans, we kind of put our judgment to it. We bring it in connection with the other things that are happening in the organization and so on. And especially in qualitative user research, it's not only about finding patterns. I think that's something where AI is increasingly better and better, like finding similarities between participants. But oftentimes it's also to kind of, find those gems that maybe only one person said, but that kind of lets you see a problem in a totally different aspect, or kind of that opens up a whole set of new questions. And as soon as you automate that away and just go to, hey, one-click report, you will never serve, like, these gems will never surface. And at the end, I think this is also where, yeah, at the end, the competitive advantage lies, right? Finding like a unique aspect to a problem that your competitors maybe don't have. So I do think that, like, the easy to understand, or the broad patterns, that's something that AI can really do. But as soon as you try to, find unique things or find inspiration, you have to go into the data, but you just can't automate it away.
Mm-hmm. I really liked it how you phrase it when we internally discuss this, is that basically you don't want AI to kind of automate the human strengths away. Maybe you can touch upon that a bit as well.
Sorry, can you repeat? I didn't understand.
I said how when we internally discussed this, how you said sort of the phrase of you don't want AI to automate the human strengths away. And I think it kind of relates to this way of thinking where it's you kind of want the like mundane, slower things to be faster, but still not kind of sacrificing what makes humans doing research so unique and I guess understanding of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's kind of like our philosophy with how we build Condens, is that we don't try to. So there's a lot of tasks, there's a lot of process that user researchers still do, and of course did more of in the past, that where there's value in there, but it's more like procedural work, right? And I do think there's a lot of those things where we can provide shortcuts, where we can give a faster way of finding information, of doing certain tasks that are not there. But at the same time, what we don't want to automate away is like the things that humans are particularly strong at. And of course, that's always like a little bit of a balancing act, because at the same time we see like companies, researchers, designers are under stress to be more efficient and so on. But then at the end of the day, especially with qualitative research, it is about the quality of what comes out there. And if you get a report in a one-click way and you get like a bullet list of something, the question is, okay, what impact does it really have with your organization? Because at the end of the day, research is only as good as the impact it has on the company, right?
Yeah.
Coming
Maybe
back, maybe just
sorry,
one more
go
thing,
ahead.
Eva, regarding your question, because you framed it in an interesting way. It's like, I think what we said is like, we don't want the human element to be automated away. I think there's an interesting aspect to that. I mean, one is yes, we personally, like Max and everyone at the company, like we empathize with researchers, and I mean, we've over the years grown many like cool relationships with them, so we see that, and we don't want their jobs to be automated away. At the same time, we're not seeing that, like, just from a like rational perspective, we're not seeing that. We're seeing AI being useful in many of the subtasks that the researcher or people who do research do, but it's not there yet, and we don't know when and if it will be there, to do like the entire job, as Max said, with all of the nuance, with all of the different perspective, bringing in the quality and everything that this leads to. Ideally, it leads to differentiation and a better positioning of the entire company in the end. Yes, technically you could do that today. You could upload all of your interviews to ChatGPT and get a report, but then the result will likely be something very average, that won't be a lot of different help with differentiation against the other players in the market. And then this is like one of the first things I learned in business school. Like if you don't differentiate, then it's you're competing on price essentially, and yet it's a race to the bottom in terms of pricing, price. So I think many of the organizations employing researchers are trying to do something different and trying to have this different angle. So I'm absolutely convinced that at the stage we're at right now, the value of people who are doing research in humans is absolutely there, and is bringing in the quality. And the role of AI is to help with a lot of the tedious tasks that would be very time consuming. And yeah, maybe free up some time to do more of the quality adding tasks in the end.
Yeah. When we talk about this entire shift of where you're basically able to just upload your raw data, and in some cases you just have AI kind of analyze it. There has been also a lot of talk about what happens with taxonomies now that we have that option. How do you still see them being relevant, or is their role now kind of different with all the AI options that we have?
Yeah. In my view, taxonomy, having tags in a way where you say, okay, you highlight certain aspect, like certain quotes or certain parts of your notes, and structure them with tags. That's kind of a tool that works incredibly well, right? And I think also when we talk about how to bring in AI into the workflow, we need a common language, something that humans and AI can work on and collaborate on. And I think the concept of tags is still relevant there. So I do think, so for us at Condens, what we do did introduce, and what we will have more and more is like AI suggesting, for example, highlights, suggesting tags and things like that. But it's always in a way that humans can go in, can basically do everything the AI also does. At the same time, it really helps you to persist the structure, right? That just think about, yeah, collecting and tracking certain feedbacks for certain patterns, for certain trends, certain topics. What would the solution that, let's say, tagless, purely AI solution would be? Would you ask the same question over and over again and would just reanalyze, and then of course come up with slightly different answers every time? So that's, I do think taxonomy still has a future and is still super relevant today. What I do think will change a little bit is I don't think there will be much need of, going through all of the data in advance to make the qualitative data usable in the future. So the way we think about it is ideally you wouldn't have to, apply, like go through everything, tag everything vigorously just to make it so you can find it in the future. Ideally, I see it more as a tool that helps you discover, and as you go use the tags and collaborate on those tags. And then of course for patterns you want to you want to track, you'll get better and better automated suggestions for that. Let's say we have in Condens, we also track all of our, of course, we use Condens ourselves, where we use like all of the feedback that we get and feature requests. And what we'll definitely have in the future will be like that you don't have to go through all of the feature requests or all of the feedback yourself to kind of apply the text, but that you get automated suggestions for those things, and those will get better and better. So I think it's not gonna be as time consuming anymore, and it's more like tag as you go when you're really trying to answer a question, and not just something comes in, you have to tag it right away, otherwise it's lost.
And that, by the way, like for me, this is quite a relief. I mean, I remember like all the time whenever I added some feedback to Condens, I felt like I have to now find the right tag. Otherwise, we will won't find this again in the future. I feel like this is quite a relief to know that, hey, we have a really very decent natural language search that will help find this again if it ever comes up. And I think that's quite okay. I would probably be a bit more progressive on that front. I would even say that, or at least we're seeing many teams starting without like a dedicated taxonomy. They're like starting pretty much on the go. They're using tags if it helps them to interact with like certain AI answers and rearrange them or edit them and so on, or they're using them as sort of verified human searches, so to say, so they know that everything that is in this tag, all of the evidence connected to this tag is sort of good to go and then to share with others. But I think at least with what we're seeing, many are starting their repository without like a bigger effort in the beginning to define like a taxonomy or something, which is definitely different than what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I mean, for us as a small company, that was the approach from the beginning, to only like have the taxonomy as a living thing. But I do understand that the challenge is different in a larger team. And I do know that there was a lot of kind of, I don't know if fear of missing out is the correct term, but definitely some sort of stress or fear that you really have to have the perfect taxonomy from the get-go. Otherwise, the structure of your repository is gone. And I really do think that this stress is getting less and less, and that we'll have solutions that are, way more flexible and way less rigorous and strict from the beginning. So I do think also adopting a research repository will get easier in that way, because you can just use it right away. You can upload your data that you already have, start searching on the raw data. Yeah.
And the same for the stakeholders as well. I think it's a huge change for the stakeholders, because in the past they would also need to know which categories do exist, how do I search like by my product department and these kind of things. And this is also we're seeing how this is also improving. Maybe one thing to add here is that I do think that meta information fields, like context that you add to either raw data or reports or personas or so, is still very important, especially with AI-powered searches, because defining scoping the search and the possible answers is very helpful to finding the right answers. So yeah, I think this is an important distinction that we have to make between like tagging raw data and adding context to the data that we have.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And sometimes we get the questions, why do I have to use the meta information? Because I could do it. But then oftentimes much of the meta information is not in the content itself, right? But you really need to have this to make things, like to make sense of things. Like for us, we have enterprise customers, but we also have agencies, we have individual researchers. And of course, the feedback we get from them can be very different, right? And so just being able to use these as filters as well in together with AI questions is really helping us getting more relevant answers and more relevant insights.
Since we're talking about how AI analysis works now, I think it would be nice to kind of show what it looks in Condens specifically. So Max, maybe you can go ahead and just share.
Sure. Second. Nice. Does it work?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, maybe two things that I wanted to show. I think one thing that we already have like for longer is more for the stakeholder side. As Alex said in the past, finding relevant information was hard because kind of you had to know what you're searching for. And I think one of the first things we added in terms of AI search was the Ask Your Magazine. Like in Condens, a magazine is kind of the stakeholder experience where the published reports, findings, and so on are. And so instead of having like a keyword search or anything like that, you can directly go in and just ask a question, get answers of it, and always get the evidence from the reports in here. So that's kind of like the first thing. And then the thing that we just released a few weeks back and are now rolling out to more and more data is the what we call Ask Your Session, Ask Your Sessions, where you can actually go into the raw data and instead of reading through everything, creating highlights, you can more do it in an exploratory way by asking questions. So you could go in here and, for example, ask, okay, let's say in this scenario, this is our demo data set where you can say words about how people started traveling, what their travel experience and so on were. And let's say we are interested in understanding how people started traveling. And we can just go in here and then see kind of get an answer, but it's always attached with the raw data. And you can do this for the one like for each interview individually. But I think where the real power comes in is when you do that across your whole project. So these are all individual interviews here. And if you go in and then you can just ask a question. And if we ask the question here, then it will go through all of the interviews and try to come up with like a good answer. And the most important thing is it tries to get all the relevant evidence from there. And that's also something where we put a lot of effort in because like the traditional when you talk about, I think there's like a real interesting difference between normal search where you want to search for facts and kind of AI search that we use for user research. Because when searching for facts, you're not searching for all of the evidence, you're searching for the most relevant evidence or the source that gives you like the best answer. Kind of that's the most true. But of course, in user research, we try to get all of the relevant information in here to get like a full picture of it because we're not searching for facts, right? We're trying to understand our customers, our participants, and so on. And so here you see as well, we get like a full answer and with the evidence included here. And you see here, these are already tagged evidence, but it will also, here, for example, we see it also created suggestions where it hasn't been tagged yet. And what you can do now with that is either go through it one by one or pick like maybe certain parts of the answer. But if you think the answer is already super good, you can also go here, create an artifact. Let's use a whiteboard. An artifact in Condens is everything that is where interpretation goes in. This could be your notes when you go through them and find patterns, but this could also be the presentation or a whiteboard that you use. And then you can just go in here, drag and drop the entire answer in here. And now we have the answer, but we also have all of the evidence in here. You can play it as highlight reels, and of course you can edit everything in here. So when you say, okay, this isn't right exactly, or you can add certain evidence, you can delete certain evidence. That's kind of like a core idea at Condens that kind of the user is always in control and can always kind of override the answers and the evidence and everything that you get from basically the AI result. Yeah. Did I forget anything, Eva? I'm not sure.
There's a question, maybe you can go back about what are the AI groups, maybe just to clarify that.
You probably meant from
Yes.
this year. That's kind of like the groups that we have here. So kind of when you ask a question on the content, then you get like a general short, quick answer, and then you get a more detailed answer for the different patterns that were seen, and each of those patterns has like a group of evidence, and these is what we call AI groups, kind of how it is sorted and grouped together. And of course, you can also just use one of those AI groups. Let's use just this one because I think this is interesting. Then I can copy this in here, and that then copies over the cluster with the title, with the description you see here, and with all of the evidence.
And maybe a small thing that I really appreciate about that is in Condens you can select like the researchers, so to say, so the people who are conducting the research and the participants, and the AI will focus its answers on the participants' answers. So that's one of the things you won't have to take care of, and it will not sort of mix those two. So it's one of the small but mighty things that you get from a dedicated research tool in this case, because it's specified for that task.
Yeah. And yeah, at the moment, this is, one question here was, can you influence the AI groups? You can do so by giving it into the question, right? So we also have like a feature that is also auto clustering on the whiteboard, and there you can also say, just specify this or this, basically how you would communicate with AI here. Yeah. At the moment, this feature is mainly for, normal sized projects. What we're working on now and what we will release in the near future is a scaled version of that, where you can have it on huge projects, but then also on your entire database. Of course, as I said, here also meta information come to play. We can also combine this with, let's say, any participant data, let's say which company they are in or which country they came from. And the larger the data set is, the more important is that you also use those, because the more data there is, the more room for errors, or maybe let's say the course of the question always the answer will also get. So this is where it really comes into play, when you have like structured data that you can use to kind of make the room in the searching room smaller.
I think
yeah.
maybe something that you mentioned that we can touch upon briefly is sort of one balancing the humans and sort of the automation of the AI. We could talk about some guardrails that we have in place so that it doesn't go fully kind of out of hand. There is also a question that I think is very timely in terms of how do we approach and create these guardrails so that information is not merely absorbed by the LLM.
Yeah. So I think one thing that is really important is to understand that none of the data in Condens is used to train any LLM. So there is a difference in using it and training it, right? Other than the human brain, that whenever you use it, you learn, that's different for an LLM. And we have contracts with all of our providers that they're prohibited from using any data that we use for training the data. So you can kind of think of like an LLM like a brain without any memory. And that's what we use here, because of course we know the data in Condens of our customers is like really sensitive, and the data belongs to our customers. We don't use it to train any models or anything like that.
And And maybe to add to that, I think we have also a couple of guardrails on the user side, especially for the stakeholders, because I mean, our beta phase was very, very helpful. We got a lot of input and learned a lot about how people use those. And one of the learnings was that the type of questions that people ask are varying a lot. Like there's the typical questions that you would expect, like what do you know about this topic, or what research do we have about people from this country. But there's also like questions like what is the most important feature request, or what is the most important usability issue, or maybe even things like what should we work on next. Like these are questions that are interpretation that require like a lot more context, and this is, for example, one of the things that we're sort of filtering out, and the team spent quite a lot of time on like trying to sort of categorize these questions, making sure that the answer, sometimes that's also like list questions, like show me all of the reports we did for this type of product in the last year, or something like that. And especially those questions where it's about like interpretation, or that, that cannot be answered from the data. I think or we learned that this is then decided in the end that it's important to filter those out and yeah, put in a guardrail for the stakeholders as well, because yeah, if we would put that into a general like ChatGPT, you would likely get an answer, and likely it would add an interpretation layer on top, which you don't want in these kind of situations.
Yeah. Yeah, especially what you said, what we hear quite often is like what is the most asked, or most this or that. And I think what we try to do is like to always like our goal is that the answers in Condens also give like also communicate what kind of information you can get out of a qualitative data repository, and which ones you probably won't. And whenever you ask for how many people said this or that, then you're asking more or less a statistical question, which is in the fewest cases statistically relevant, right? With qualitative research, it's about understanding what's behind it. It's about the why, and it's not so much about the how many exactly. That's not what qualitative research is for. And so that's where we try to give like a good answer, and also kind of suggest different phrasing or different questions where you actually can get like a good answer to. Yeah. And maybe one anecdote in terms of like the different questions. One thing from the beta that we had that I found really like eye-opening was someone used the Ask Your Session to kind of get like more like a meta critique on his or I don't know, yeah, his interview styling. So he asked, okay, where could I have drilled down more? And it actually gave like an answer. Of course, it wasn't like the best answer because it wasn't tuned for that, but that's definitely something that we maybe will revisit in the future. But that was just like I would have never thought of it, but that was super interesting.
I can see that we have quite a lot of questions in the Q&A. So maybe before we hop onto that part, just sort of your outlook on what's next. What are you excited about with the opportunities that AI brings in general? And we can also talk more specifically about what that means for Condens and where we are headed. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I can go. I think I see. I mean, it's always hard to say, okay, what will the future bring and so on. But what I see already happening, and that what I think is also a little bit logical, are two main patterns. The first one, I do think that in terms of the roles in UX, probably not only in UX, probably in many fields, are getting more generalist roles again. Because so when I started studying, it was just generally UX, and then it's specialized in different roles. We had like UX research as its own role emerged, but also things like information architects, we had UX writers, and so on and so on. And I do think that it's getting more and more generalist again, as a lot of the detailed craft will be handled by LLMs, or where you can get better help, or you can learn also like you can level up your skills easier now. And what that means is for Condens and for UX research in general, I think more and more people will do tasks that we kind of categorize as UX research, even if they don't think it's research. Because I think understanding customers deeply will remain a competitive advantage. And so the need for speaking with customers, the need for understanding your customers is still there. And I do think as the barriers to talk with your customers get more down or get lower, more and more people will do that. And I do think that's my guess, is that the role of full-time UX researchers will go even more in the direction of research ops or as enabler for the whole organization. And then of course for the really foundational research, the things where you can really make the difference, the strategic things that are not straightforward. And I think the second thing that I see, especially for a repository like Condens, is that by getting more efficient in the workflow, we open up a whole new set of data for to gain knowledge from. Traditionally, only interviews, usability tests, and so on were used because there the information density was the highest. And of course, we all knew, okay, there must be a lot of insights in a lot of information in sales calls, in support requests, app reviews, things like that. But it was just way too much work to go through those. But now, as finding interesting things inside of more data, I think we open up Condens especially to those kinds of data. So I think in the future, what we'll see is that more and more data will just getting uploaded into Condens, and then you can ask questions on all of those data and get insights from this. I think especially sales calls, super interesting. We do that at Condens. I go through those once a month to just see, okay, what were people asking for? What questions did they have? Did we have a good answer there, or maybe are there some unmet needs that we don't know of yet? Yeah, those are kind of the two bigger picture things that I see.
Yeah, I agree, and I think this is also one of the questions in the chat, how we're seeing non-researcher roles doing research. This is something that we see. It is something that we see with different kinds of organizations where we're seeing that more and more people who are not full-time researchers are invited as contributors to Condens. And this is not because we're pushing that, but it's because these organizations are requesting it. And I think in the end, looking at it from a business perspective or from an organizational perspective, this may actually make sense because there may not be the possibility to have researchers on every team and in every group. And now with AI, conducting research and running research became easier. We try to make the differentiation where we see it does help, and there's definitely areas where it doesn't help, but still it became more accessible, it became easier and faster. And this is the trend that we're seeing, especially with designers and product managers doing a lot more of that, and researchers often either supporting that, helping with the base, the infrastructure, the workflows, and the strategic aspects of the part as well. And maybe to add, I do think in general this is a positive thing. I mean, I know that there's different views about that in the community, and researchers are having also skeptical of that, and it's totally right to be skeptical, and because there's also risks. But overall, I'm also seeing the positive things of more people in the organization, being able to talk to their users and customers and drawing information and using that for the decision making. I think overall will improve the experience of all the products and services that we're using. So I definitely see the positive aspects of that.
Is there anything more specific that you can share about what's coming to Condens? Because I think that's something that people want to hear.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think the first thing I already talked a little bit about it is this whole ask your data. We'll bring that not only to, asking on raw data more globally, but we'll also bring that on different kinds of data. So at the moment, for example, you have the highlights, and we'll also bring that to this. So you can have, let's say, you have a tag of all, let's say, usability issues, and you can ask a question on this. You can get groups from that as well to just, use this kind of drill down and more explorative way of searching to any data where it might be useful in Condens. That's one thing that we're working on. Other things is at the moment we're working on Condens API and MCP server that goes more into the direction where we see the future that more and more data will be uploaded or will be part of Condens, and we want to make that as seamless as possible. So importing all of this data will get more and more easy. And then another thing, I think, Michael, I saw the question about live note taking. That's perfect timing. It's actually live note taking is in review at the moment, so I guess we'll release it this or next week. So that's also where we want to make it more seamless to actually where you can, type notes during your interviews, and then these notes will be synced into the transcript, and it's kind of act as kind of like bookmarks where you can, jump to sections that are already interesting. You can have your observations inside of your highlights and so on. Those are concrete things that are on the roadmap now. Yeah, maybe other things that we already released in the past as well. I think one thing that is also AI powered a bit that was super helpful, where we got really good feedback on, is anonymization. So for example, automated face blurring, but also voice anonymization that really helped a lot of, especially enterprise customers that had like very sensitive data. So you can still share videos of your interviews, usability tests, and so on, because that's also something that was kind of like the core idea of Condens. That was like one of the core pain points I knew myself as a UX designer back then. It just makes a huge difference showing your, let's say, in my case, that was my developers, so to say, my product team, to really show the issues and show your participants struggle. Instead of just telling them, hey, this and this doesn't work. And I still think this is super true. So having like clips everywhere, that's also part of the evidence that we have. At the end, it's all about having impact in the company, and not just, producing insights and like quote unquote insights that at the end nobody's maybe even noticing or not acting on.